friends, I am Sanjay Mansukhani from ChangeDestiny.in. I am a teacher of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. Dear friends, we are in the fourth chapter of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, and this chapter is focusing on liberation or Kaivalya, even called absolute independence or moksha, nirvana. And this is the ultimate goal of yoga. This is the ultimate goal where all the vrittis of the mind come to a full stop, a complete rest. Vrittis are thoughts and fluctuations which happen in the mind. So in this chapter, Patanjali is covering in a few sutras the yogic concept of the connection between mind and consciousness. When we are talking about consciousness here, we are talking about pure consciousness. So pure consciousness can also be understood as Atma, as Purusha, or as the soul. And the mind is the mind. So now let us look at how Patanjali has explained the connection between the two, between the mind and the soul. So in his I would say just let me open up okay. Although he says in his sutra number 22nd sutra of the fourth chapter on Kaivalya, absolute independence, he says that although consciousness is constantly unchanging, it is never changing, but it is becoming aware of its own intelligence by means of pervading the forms assumed by the intelligence. So what it means is that the chitta can act and continually change into the forms of the world, and meanwhile the Purusha, the soul, as a witness, it remains inactive and unchanging but aware. Let's look at it. You see, it is the chitta which is looking towards the world. It is the chitta which is receiving signals from the organs of perception, through the mind, through the ego, into the intellect. So here chitta means the combination of these three elements inside the inner mind, that is the intellect, the ego, and the mind. Now these three together are acting and they are continually changing. They are not passive, they are not fixed, they are not stationary, they are not unchanging, they are not constant. They are continually changing and fluctuating. They are continually acting. So why does it continually change and why does it continually act? For the simple reason that a chitta has access to the knowledge from the outside world, which is coming in continuously through the five sense organs. And this knowledge, which is coming in continuously, is creating changes inside. And these changes which are getting created inside are resulting in sanskaras, are resulting in formation of memory. And these sanskaras, these memories trigger karma, trigger action. Therefore, here he says that the chitta can act and continually change. Into what? Into the forms of the world. Now, where does the information of the forms of the world come in from? The information about the forms of the world, dear friends, is coming in from the sense organs. And while this is happening continuously in the chitta, there is another entity here, there is another tattva here, which is the Purusha. This Purusha, as I said earlier, is the Atma, is the soul. Now this Purusha is not acting. This Purusha is not continually changing. This Purusha is merely there as a witness. This Purusha is remaining completely inactive and completely unchanging, but in spite of being completely inactive and completely unchanging, this chitta is displaying awareness. So this is a very unique concept. The Purusha is aware but unchanging. The Purusha is aware but it is inactive. So once if you understand these two, the difference in behavior between the mind and the Purusha, or between the mind and the soul, then you get a fairly good understanding of how to move, how to find the difference where the mind ends and where the soul begins. If one is able to discriminate between the mind and the soul, if one is able to find the boundary between the mind and the soul, if one is able to transcend the mind into the region, into the domain, into the zone of the soul, then tremendous growth has taken place. Because normal people, the common man, is not able to differentiate between the mind and the soul. He considers his soul to be the mind. And for him, both of them are one. The mind and the soul are one. But here in this particular sutra, the sutra number, I would say 22 of the 4th chapter of the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali has specifically pointed out that the mind is constantly acting and that the mind is constantly changing, and it is doing both of them, the acting and the changing, based on what all are the forms of the world outside. And the world outside, as we know, is constantly changing. What is having a form will be without a form after some time. What is without a form will have a form after some time. Why? Because the world outside has three qualities of Prakriti, three qualities of nature, and these are, as per the yogic concept, Sattva, Rajas and Tamas. So Sattva is the quality of formlessness. Rajas is the quality of change, and Tamas is the quality of having a form. So the world outside has all these three, and they keep on changing, they keep on dancing, they keep on fluctuating. Similarly, the mind inside also has these three qualities. And the mind inside also becomes formless, has a form, and therefore keeps on changing. So the mind keeps on acting on the world outside, and the mind keeps on changing inside. So this is the mind. And what is the soul? Soul is that tattva, that principle, which is merely a witness to all this change. It is merely a witness to whatever is happening in the world outside, all the changes of form and no form happening in the world outside. And how does it become aware of it? It directly does not become aware of it. It is the mind which first becomes aware of the changes of the world outside. And whatever changes the mind is picking up of the world outside, the mind itself undergoes those changes. The mind itself undertakes those forms. The mind itself acts continuously according to what is coming into it from the world outside. So the soul is able to be aware of whatever is happening in the mind, but it is not changing by itself. It itself is unchanging. The soul is able to see all the changes, all the fluctuations, all the actions which are happening in the mind. But by itself, the soul is inactive. The soul is putting no action whatsoever. It is only the mind which is acting. You must remember that. The soul never acts in the world outside. It is only the mind which acts in the world outside. The soul is not changing, come what may. It is only the mind which is changing. But the soul is aware of all that is happening. And how is it aware? It is aware of all that is happening because it can have an awareness of what is happening in the mind. And the mind is reflecting all the changes of the world. So the soul becomes aware of all the changes which are happening in the world outside. So this is one important sutra, and if you meditate on this, if you put your attention on this, if you focus some time on this, and if you do this meditation for probably say 30 days, just for 15 minutes, you will be able to differentiate between what a soul is and what a mind is. You will be able to discriminate between what a soul is and what a mind is. And as you do this meditation, you will find your brain cells have developed. They have picked up this idea as to what is the mind and what is the soul and what differentiates the two of them. And as you keep on practicing, you will find there are multiple brain networks which will be having this data. And then you will be able to differentiate both of them in a very clear way. And once if you are able to identify yourself with the soul, and if you start spending time with the soul, then you result in a situation which is you are there with your Swarupa, with your own original identity, and you stop identifying yourself with the mind. The mind is only reflecting what is happening in the world outside constantly and nothing else. So you actually are not the mind. And the world outside is constantly changing. It is changing as per what is happening in the mind. So both of them, the mind and the world, the chitta and the prakriti, the chitta and the objects outside, they keep on dancing with each other in tango. If we change something outside, the mind changes. If we change something in the mind, the outer world changes. So they keep on constantly dancing together. But it is the soul, the Purusha, the Atma, which is not changing. And it is the soul, the Purusha, the Atma, which watches this dance, the dance of the mind and the objects outside, the constant dance, the never-ending dance. And it is only when you start becoming aware of the soul, and it is only when you meditate and focus on the soul, you will find that the dancing between the mind and the world and its objects outside slows down, and eventually this dancing will one day stop. And when this dancing one day stops, then the mind now no longer exists. The role of the mind is over forever. And when the role of the mind is over forever, the world and its objects disappears, because the mind was the object of was the cause of perception. The mind was seeing the world outside through itself. But when the mind itself has disappeared, then the world has no way of being cognized. There is no way the world can be seen and perceived, so that the world itself disappears. The world goes, the mind goes. What is left is just the Purusha, the soul which is unchanging, the soul which is inactive but aware. So now the soul is aware about whom, what? It is aware about itself. Because the mind has gone, the objects are gone, the world is gone. So this is a very important sutra. This is the beginning of that differentiation, very clear-cut way between the mind and the soul. So this simple meditation will start doing wonders for you. And when you understand this sutra, contemplate on its meaning and drive it deep inside you, then you will have the realization of the soul. Then you will have the Atma Sakshatkar happening in you. And that is the objective of yoga. And then you suddenly find you have access to tremendous knowledge. Why? Because when you are focusing on the soul, soul is the source of all knowledge. Soul is the source of all power. Soul by nature is into Ananda. So when you are able to move your attention, your focus from the mind to the soul, then you experience an increase in power, an increase in knowledge, and an increase in happiness. And as you keep on focusing more and more on the soul, the mind weakens, the world weakens, the senses weaken, the attraction and repulsion of the world weakens, the ego weakens, and there is a deluge of knowledge which comes in and removes all the ignorance. And then you start having the realization that you are actually the soul, you are in effect the Purusha, you are the Atma. And this self-realization helps you to achieve a life without sorrow. Okay, so let's move on to the next sutra, the 23rd sutra of the 4th chapter. Here he says, the mind gets colored by the seer, that means the Atma, the Purusha, and as well as that which is seen, that is the objects outside. So the mind is able to see all the objects outside, and the mind is also getting colored by the Purusha. So the mind is having an impact on both sides. The mind is getting impacted by the objects of the world, and the mind is also getting impacted by the presence of the Atma, the Purusha, the soul. So this chitta, this mind, this is the pivot, this is the fulcrum, this is the main point on which the entire sansaric existence and its experiences are based. This chitta, this mind, keeps on taking the forms of all the objects of the world, and by itself it is the object for whom the Purusha. The Purusha's awareness is resting on its object, which is the mind. So Vyasa, one of the major commentators, makes a very interesting statement. He says that the mind gets colored by both the object and the subject, because the mind is able to see the objects. It has the 5 sense organs coming in and bombarding it with information, with data. So the mind gets colored by all the objects of the world. At the same time, the awareness of the soul, the awareness of the Purusha, the awareness of the Atma, that too falls on the mind. That too is directed towards the mind. So the mind is impacted from both the sides, from the outer side of the world and from the further inner side of the Purusha. So when it is reflecting, the Purusha's consciousness, that means the awareness which is coming in from the Purusha, it is reflecting that back to the Purusha. And it is reflecting also the objects which are falling in onto the mind. So what all it is picking up as the inert objects of the world outside, it is even projecting, reflecting that back towards the Purusha. So the Purusha is able to see the mind because of its awareness, and the mind reflecting back to it what it has. And what does the mind have? Mind has information about the objects outside. So whatever information the mind has about the objects in the world outside, that once it comes in on the mind is pushed back into the Purusha. So the Purusha is able to see the world outside, but indirectly through the reflection of the mind. Yeah, so the mind is impacted by both the Purusha, the soul, as well as by the objects outside. Acha. Moving further to the 24th Sutra of the same 4th chapter. Here it says our mind has innumerable sanskaras, subliminal impressions, vrittis, kleshas inside it. But all this which the mind has inside it, all the thoughts, ideas, concepts, experiences, vrittis, sanskaras, memories, kleshas, karmas, all of them is there inside the mind. But all that this is there inside, it is not for itself. It is existing for whom? It is existing for the soul. It is existing for the Purusha. It is existing for the Atma. So what it means is our soul, which is doing this journey on this planet, all that it has experienced so far, right from its beginningless time till now, all the vrittis, all the experiences, all the thoughts, all the ideas, concepts, kleshas, karmas, sanskaras, which our soul has taken on this path, they are all stored in the mind. So what all data, what all information, what all is known to the mind, what all is stored in the mind is not for itself. It is merely a supporting information, a supporting data for the soul and the soul's journey through various lives and deaths, through various births. So that is an important thing to follow. Now here, because this mind is carrying a record, so this mind is constantly changing. This mind is not constant. This mind is not steady. This mind is continuously fluctuating. It is taking form, it is giving up form. So this taking form, giving form and changing is the nature of the mind. And this also results in continuous action. Action in one way, action in another way, changing actions. So the mind is constantly moving, playing, fluctuating. But for whom it is working for the soul. It is doing all this drama, all this action, all this recording for the soul. The soul by itself is changeless. The soul by itself is constant. The soul does not change. So the mind is present to provide all kinds of experiences to the soul. The mind is present to give these experiences as worldly experiences or these experiences as liberating experiences to the soul. So when the mind feels pleasure, that feeling of pleasure is not for itself, nor is the manifestation of any form of pain. That is also not there for itself. Anything which is happening in the mind, pain, pleasure, knowledge, experience, whatever is happening in the mind is happening for the soul, is happening for the other. Mind is merely a servant. Mind is merely a transformer. Mind is merely a power creator. Mind is merely a doer. Mind is merely a storing agent. For whom? For the soul. The soul is the owner. The soul is the possessor of the mind. A soul is not there for the mind. The mind is there for the soul. The soul is a permanent entity. The soul is ever constant. The soul is eternal, infinite. But the mind is not permanent. The mind is not infinite. The mind is not eternal. The mind keeps on changing. And the mind will one day disappear. So this is again another important thing to understand and contemplate upon, meditate upon, and then you will have a deeper and deeper understanding of the mind and the soul, and what is different between the two, how do they operate, what is their relationship to each other, who is supporting whom. And as you keep on digging deeper and deeper into the operational aspects of the mind and the soul, you will realize that you are becoming closer and closer to soul consciousness. You will realize that your knowledge, your power levels, your happiness levels, your ability to handle situations, circumstances, all shoot up, all reach a very higher and higher level. So that is another important thing, and it helps. The 25th Sutra. He says, if you are able to see what is the distinction between these both entities, the mind and the soul, then you will find that you are no longer thinking about your ego. The ego becomes irrelevant. The doership becomes irrelevant. You have been able to slice your internal mind into two separate selves. One is the soul and another is the mind. So all the past recordings are there in the form of sanskaras in the chitta. So when we do the practice of yoga, then it is a case where we remove all the sanskaras so that the path of liberation becomes neat, clean and clear. And liberation can only happen when the mind is cleaned up. And when the mind gets completely cleaned up, then there is no difference between the nature of the mind and the nature of the soul, because both of them display the same qualities. And only difference is, since the mind becomes sattvic, completely sattvic, but even when the mind is completely sattvic, sattva has the element of rajas also along with it in Prakriti. So sattva will never remain sattva for an indefinite period of time. It will not remain formless for an indefinite period of time. But the soul is formless forever, for eternity. And that is why, as you keep on cleaning the mind of all form, all changes, all rajas, all tamas, and you make it more and more sattvic, that is when the soul activation takes place. That is when the soul realization takes place. And that is when the yogi goes deeper and deeper into himself, into a journey which is beyond the ordinary. Now when the mind is inclined towards discrimination between the mind and the soul, because it is only the mind which can discriminate, it is only the mind which can fine-tune and see the difference. It is only the mind which can use viveka, which can use the power of buddhi, intellect, to discriminate, to see where the mind ends and where the soul begins. So the moment you are able to do that, the moment you are able to practice that on a regular basis, you find that the mind is able to recognize the distinction between itself, that is the mind, and the soul. So the mind of the yogi, which was previously engaged in all sorts of sensual gratification, sensual happiness from the world outside, now undergoes a change, now undergoes a transformation, because it is no longer focused on the world outside now. It is becoming focused on the soul inside. And to perceive the soul inside, no sense organs are required. And there is no pleasure out of perceiving the soul. The only feeling which comes in a big way is about Ananda. So now a yogi, when he is focusing on the soul, he is developing a tremendous knowledge out of this power of discrimination which he has built up. And this takes him towards liberation. This gravitates his life towards Kaivalya. And it is this Viveka, this Viveka Shakti, this Viveka Khyati, which gives him all the knowledge and which removes his complete ignorance and gives him Kaivalya, gives him freedom. So dear friends, this is again an important sutra. For Kaivalya to happen, discrimination must come in. For discrimination to come in, you must be able to see the difference between the mind and the soul. And when you are able to see the difference between the mind and the soul, the process of liberation takes effect. The progress of liberation moves forward. And then the yogi gets tremendous knowledge. And once when he has access to tremendous knowledge, he enters the door of Kaivalya. He achieves liberation. He achieves freedom. He achieves absolute independence. So, that's it for today. We had a look upon the various aspects of the I would say the soul and the mind and the interconnection between the two of them, the yogic concepts about the two of them, and this leads to liberation. Liberation means permanent happiness, long-term happiness. And if you are able to practice this and achieve this, then all you need to do is teach your family members so that they also in this ever-changing, fast, dynamic world can experience permanent happiness. And the same thing can be trained and imparted. That training and imparting of knowledge can be shared with people of your society, with the people of your country, with the people of the world at large. And when we do it, dear friends, then we can transform this whole planet of ours from a sorrowful planet, from a miserable planet, to a planet of complete happiness, to a planet of complete, I would say, joy, ananda. And that is the goal of all of us here. That is why we are doing these talks on a regular basis, so the message of the Yoga Sutras reaches out to the world population, that people know that one can achieve permanent happiness in this life, that people realize it is also doable to achieve Kaivalya, complete liberation from Prakriti, in this life and this life form only. So dear friends, I thank you tremendously for being part of today's talk, for listening to me patiently. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow also. Thank you so much. God bless you. Take care. Thank you.